Hey patrons, welcome back to the fourth and final painting tutorial in the series. In this series we have been focusing on painting Christmas cards. We've done a polar bear, a robin, some winter trees, and now in this one we are working on this bauble on a Christmas tree. So I'm going to be starting off with my Molotow masking fluid pen, but you can just use normal masking fluid if you want. And I've got the sketch already done. I have attached that and the reference image for you guys as always, as well as the materials list in the description, the full materials list. And I'm starting off by using that masking fluid to mask off any areas which we want to preserve. And so I usually use this for like highlights. So any areas that I want to make sure are nice and white so that we can work on them later on. So I'm mainly going to be masking off the snow on the branches, but I'm also masking off right now in between little sections of this bauble. There's like gold, and I don't want to get lots of paint on there when we use the wet on wet method. So I want to preserve them so that when we work on the green background, I don't want to run the risk of getting green watercolour on any of these areas on the bauble, because these are gold. We're going to be painting them in gold, and so we're going to be using like a yellow gold watercolour, and if it gets any green on it, when it mixes in with the yellow, it's just going to look wrong and muddy and it won't look as good. So it's better just to mask off these areas and work on the background and then fill them in once we've done the whole of the background. So I'm just going to continue for the next few minutes just to mask off all of these edges on the bauble. Now that I've done all of those areas and that little highlight on the bauble, I'm working now on the little bit that's used to hang the bauble onto the tree, so the little lace ribbon part. So I'm masking off the edge of that as well. And I'm also going to start to mask off the highlights on the cap of the bauble. So I'm just working on the outer edges where this sort of section meets the background. I want to mask off those areas. Again, this is gold, so I don't want the green of the background to bleed onto this area and muddy up the colours. But I'm not masking off the whole area, just the highlights. And now that I've done that, I'm going to finally go in and start to work on adding the highlights to the background now that we've got in all of the highlights on the main decoration, while all of the areas that we want to mask off and keep highlighted. And to get in the look of snow on the branches, you can see that I'm just sort of doing this tapping motion and just stippling on the masking fluid pen. Quite randomly, just stippling away, just to build up some snow onto these branches so that when we work on the background and wipe off the masking fluid, these little bits of snow that we're doing now will stay white and will give a really natural and cool effect like snow. And once again, I'm just going to repeat this process for the next couple of minutes for all of the branches. So I'll be adding masking fluid onto all of these branches, as you can see. Just using this stippling tapping motion, looking at the reference to see where the most snow is gathered on each branch, because you don't want to add the masking fluid all over the branch, otherwise you won't see any of the green and it won't look as effective like it's snow. So don't add it everywhere, just tap on a few areas of snow. So I've nearly finished off masking all of these branches. I am also going to add a little bit of masking fluid to that sort of diamond gem decoration towards the bottom left of this painting. I'm just going to be masking off the brightest highlights that I can see in the reference image. You can see that for some branches I have got more bits of snow, and I've targeted more of the snow in certain areas so that we have the look of really dense areas of snow, and then ones that are a bit more varied as well. So some areas have got a lot of snow to them, and then other areas of the branch have only got a little bit. So I've wanted that variety. Now that we've added in all of the masking fluid, you can see that I did go in and add a little bit to the lightest reflections on that bottom decoration. I'm now going in and I'm pre-wetting the whole of the paper, just like we've done with all other 3 paintings. So just using water just to pre-wet the surface. And I'm being very careful not to scrub too hard because I don't want to accidentally make the masking fluid come off, even though it's pretty sturdy and strong. So I'm just going to go ahead and just wet the whole of the surface. Now that I've done that, I'm going to start to mix up the green that we're going to apply in between the branches. So I'm going to start off by mixing some light green onto my palette, quite a bit of that. I'm also going to mix in some Payne's Grey, which is that dark blue we use for our winter tree painting and for our polar bear painting. I mixed in a bit more of the green at the start and a bit more Payne's Grey as well, so that we've got a nice bluish green. Mix in even more blue, even more Payne's Grey. I'm even adding in a tiny bit of black. And so I'm going to work this in between the trees, where you can see in the reference there's quite a lot of shadow in between the branches. So I really want to add contrast to the piece by making sure that I'm getting all areas as dark as they need to be. So because the gaps between the branches and the decorations are very dark, I'm making sure that I'm going straight in with a really dark green. And because the paper is nice and wet, the colours are very nicely bleeding out. So I'm pretty much just tapping the colours onto the paper and I'm letting them bleed out. You can see that I'm not going all the way up to the branches. I'm leaving that little sort of edge because I am aware that it's going to bleed out, and if I went right up to the edge of the branches, then it's just going to bleed too far. So I'm leaving a little bit of a gap to give it room to be able to bleed further up without going places I don't want it to. I'm also going in and creating a few lines to help build up the shape of the branches as well. Then I'm just going to continue underneath the bauble to continue and go in and add in those darker shadows. And the snow on the branches is really going to pop when you have it against this really dark, intense background. So I really am just looking around the reference, picking out the darkest parts of the background and just tapping in this green. In the reference, the background is even more like black tone than this, but I wanted it not to be so black and dark, so I did mix in more green to give it more of a dark green look rather than it being just black. I'm working it around the side of this diamond gem Christmas decoration, and you can see that the masking fluid acts as a barrier. It acts as a barrier so that the green paint isn't going to bleed into our bauble. I mixed in some more Payne's Grey so that we've got a darker colour now, and we can tap this into the really dark areas of the background. So within like the centre of each of those shadows that I've created, I'm just adding in this darker paint. And because it's still wet, it will still nicely bleed out. You can see that the masking fluid is also acting as a barrier around that ribbon on the bauble. I'm adding a little bit of shadow in between that red sort of icicle decoration and the red and gold little baubles in the background as well. So I've pretty much got all of those dark green areas blocked in. I'm just going to use a little bit of tissue to remove the paint that's got onto that red icicle decoration in the background. If I was to leave that area green and then add red on top, it would have looked muddy and the red wouldn't have appeared very vibrant against the green at all. They'd have cancelled each other out and become very muddy and dull looking, which we definitely don't want. I'm also adding a little bit of this paint in between the branches for the darkest shadows. So I'm just stippling it a little bit in between that snow to create the shadows on the branches. Also, you can see that in the background we can see some of the gold, like a gold glow in the background because of the Christmas lights. So I'm mixing up a gold tone for my watercolours. Just using like a yellowy brownish tone. And I'm just tapping that into the background. We will be adding the little details for the branches over the top of that gold. But I'm just tapping in the gold anywhere where I can see that gold glow in the background. I'm also splattering it in a bit onto the background as well. Going back in with my green. I'm just adding another layer and just filling in those darkest areas and refining the shape of the shadows a bit more. So I'm better shaping that green shadow around those three decorations in the background. I'm adding a few little details to the branches. Now I want to mix up some red to get in the red bauble in the background. And this bauble isn't in focus, so it's a bit softer. So it's okay to do it when the paper's still wet. So I'm just mixing up a red tone. And I'm just filling in the shape of that bauble. Just with that colour. Just working in between the masking fluid. Just making sure that I shape it right. I'm also tapping a little bit of red into the background in other places, and I'm going to create a base layer of red for the red icicle decoration as well. And remember, this is just a base layer of colours. We will need to refine all of these areas a bit more later on. This is just the base layer. Just going back in with the dark green and just putting this next to that red that we've added in. You can see on the reference that there is a lot of dark green to the side of the red bauble. I'm going in with even more dark green and just building up the shadows once again, adding another layer. And just tapping this into those darkest areas of the background. Around that diamond gem decoration. Making sure to lift up some of that watercolour from that clear decoration. I'm now mixing up some more of that gold tone so that we can get in this gold bauble in the background. So I'm going to add this gold as a base layer to this whole area. I'm leaving a little bit of white paper showing through for the highlight. And I'm going to add more gold paint where you can see that sort of light on the Christmas tree, creating that soft gold glow in the background. Adding a few more splatters. I'm mixing in a bit of brown into that gold paint so that we can work on the shadows of this gold bauble. So the shadows for the bauble are around the bottom and outside, and it's the lightest in the center where that highlight is. So I'm just working on making it look more 3D by adding in those shadows along the bottom and sides of that bauble, just using that darker paint that we mixed up. I'm also going in with my tissue and using this to lift up some of the paint to create a couple of highlights. If you look at the reference, you can see that we can see some reflections and highlights in the bauble. So I just want to remove the paint for those areas using a clean tissue. And this will work whilst the paper is still wet, whilst the paint is still wet. Now I want to darken up the red bauble. So I'm going in with some darker red paint, and again the shadows are pretty much around the outer edges and sides of the bauble, and it is the brightest red right in the center. So I'm just working this darker red paint throughout the sides and the top of the bauble and the bottom. Mixing in a little bit of brown and adding this over the top to create more intense shadows around this red bauble. Mixing the brown into the red and just applying that all around the sides. Just going in with the tissue to brighten up the gold bauble even more, because I felt like the middle of the bauble wasn't bright enough. There's a lot of shadow within this bauble, but all of it was quite dark, so I wanted to lift some of that paint up with the tissue, and now we're going to go in with the dark brown and build up those intense shadows. But I think this will give us more contrast within the bauble. So I'm just focusing on adding the little detailed shadows and reflections, the shadowed reflections within the bauble. Now going in with some more dark green, adding a few little paint strokes to create more details for the branches, overlapping onto the red bauble. And around the clear gem as well. It's important to add these details so it looks like they are branches, which we will be doing more in a minute as well, getting it to look like branches. Darkening up around the main bauble and all of the decorations. Like I mentioned before, I want it to have a really nice contrast. Now I'm going in and I'm starting to fill in more of that gold colour that we use for the background onto our main decoration. I'm filling in the dark green in between. The metal, that's the metal ring that you thread the ribbon through. So I just got a base wash down of that gold very lightly, and now I'm mixing in some darker gold colour and using this on the shadows of the cap and the ribbon. So I'm just painting in the darkest areas within this part of the ornament, and darkest parts throughout the ribbon as well, and the background. And this is the bauble, just to make that look a bit more saturated in a couple of areas. Now I'm going in with a clean damp brush, and I'm using this to go and create a highlight on the left hand side of this bauble. You can see that I keep cleaning it so that it will pick up even more of the paint, and it nicely gives a nice subtle highlight. And the more you clean it and re-wet it, the more paint it will pull off, so make sure you keep cleaning it once you lift some paint off before you try and lift even more off. You can see each time I do it, it gets brighter and brighter. And I'm going to do it a little bit on the other side as well. And just for that little highlight directly underneath the gold bauble, the little red highlight. I'm also just splattering a little bit of water onto the background to create a cool effect. And I'm adding more gold to the background on this side. All throughout this masking fluid, even though that's where the branch is. Like I said before, we will be painting the branch over the top, so don't worry that you're covering up where the branch is, because it is gold underneath. So now I waited for that first layer to dry, and now we're going to go and work on the second layer. I'm just mixing up some more green, going in with our base green tone that we used at the start. And I'm going to start to paint in the branches now. So you can see that I'm mixing up quite a opaque but bright green colour. You want it to be lighter than the background, so quite a bright green. And I'm going to focus on each of the branches, and I'm just going to focus on painting lines to build up the look of the branches. Make sure you're looking at the direction the branches are going in, direction you need to paint in the lines, overlap the lines as well. Try to make it look nice and organic so that you have some of the little bits on the branches crisscrossing over each other and overlapping. And so I'm going to continue to do this for all of the branches to build each one up. Just by painting little wisps, and just keep doing that and overlapping them until it builds up the bulk of the branch. You can see how nicely it goes over that gold paint. It still stands out. And I'm going to repeat this for all branches, and then I'll come back to talk you through the next step. I am now going to mix in some darker Payne's Grey to create more of a darker green. And I'm going to use this to add some shadow to the branches. So I'm going to add some little wisps, some lines and paint strokes now using this darker green, so that the branch isn't all one shade of green. I want to add a bit of variety and a bit of shadow in there. So I'm just going to go and use this paint and just repeat the same process of building up some darker bits for each branch. And I'm also just going to go and fill in any bits of shadow around the branches as well. You can see I'm stippling it over the top of where that masking fluid is, just to fill in parts of the branches that I can see on the reference are just that background colour. So I'm filling them in as well. And I'm going to repeat this process mainly on the left hand side of the painting as well, where it's got some darker bits of the branches going over the top of the red decorations and stuff like that. So I'm going to do the same thing with this paint, and then I'll be back to talk you through the next part. For the next step, I'm mixing up some dark red and brown, and I'm just going to start to go in and create more shadows and create more structure to the red bauble. So I'm defining the edge of it, the edge of the gold bauble that's overlapping it. So creating more of a defined line. I'm just going to darken up all of the edges around this red bauble. Just use some water to bleed and blend this out and soften it into the center of the bauble where it's lighter. So I'm mixing up some more of that paint. It's just really a dark red colour. You can use any sort of dark red. And I'm also stippling it throughout that lighter area because it's a glittery bauble. And to make it look a bit more glittery, you can see that there are some lighter reds and then darker bits. So I'm just stippling some darker red to create more variety. Mixing in some brown into that red to deepen it up even more, and just focusing this paint on the furthest edges of the bauble, so the far sides of the bauble and just underneath that gold one. I'm going in with a little bit of purple as well to just darken that up more. I'm also working a bit of red just throughout a couple of other areas. Moving back to the dark green, mixing that up, and I'm going to define the edge of that gold bauble. Just define it by getting in that shadowed colour, and you can see that the red like icicle, the colours for that, the red icicle and the red bauble have sort of bled up around the left hand side of that gold bauble. So I just want to get in that shadow again because it's meant to be that dark green colour rather than red directly to the left of that bauble. I'm also going to build up some more shadows on this gold bauble. Gosh, I bet the amount of times I say bauble in this tutorial is crazy. So when I'm doing these shadows, I'm following the curve of the bauble to give it more of a spherical look to it. And I'm just blending that out with a clean brush. Just going over that with a tissue just to lighten it up, but you can still see the layer that we've added. You can still see those details we've added in with that paint. It's just a little bit less dramatic and harsh. Just smoothing out some of the paint on the red bauble in the black background. And I'm working now on the red icicle decoration. First by going in with the red paint and blocking in the shapes for each section of this icicle. And you can see that between each section is like shadow. It's very dark. So we're going to be working some dark shadow in between each of these little sections of the icicle. I'm just first blocking in the red. Just making sure the shape is nice and accurate. Now I'm going in with some black and I'm just working this between each of those sections on the decoration and to the left hand side of that gold decoration as well. And I'm going to work this paint all around the edge of the icicle as well. Now it's time to go in and start to work on the bauble. So in the reference you can see that it is red and clear in certain sections, but I decided that I just wanted to make it all red and gold rather than doing that clear segments in between. So I'm just going in with the red paint and creating a nice light wash across the whole of each section. You can see it's a little bit darker right at the top. Now I'm mixing up some more red, more concentrated this time, and I'm just working this through the top, a little bit throughout the middle sections of this part of the bauble, and a lot throughout the bottom as well, because with the bauble you can see there is darkest right at the top and the bottom, and then it is more highlighted and more reflections in the center. So now I'm mixing in a little bit of purple with the red just to add some more shadows. You can see on the reference that there is a few little shadows going horizontally throughout the top section. And you can see some shadows of the outside. I think that's the patio that you can see throughout the middle section of that bauble. So I'm just painting in some rough shadows using the purple. I like adding colours like purple in with the red. I think it makes it look more interesting and vibrant that way, rather than just using like brown with the red. So I'm mixing up some more concentrated purple and building up even more intensity to the shadows that we've just painted in. And mixing in a tiny bit of black as well to intensify it even further. You can see that I'm just going over those shadows that we've already blocked in, mainly at the top and bottom sections of the bauble. So I'm doing these two specific sections at the moment because I only decided once I've done these that I actually just wanted to do it all red, because I felt like it was more Christmassy that way than trying to do it clear. And I thought it'd be easier for people to try and do. So I'm just starting off by adding a nice base wash to the whole of these two sections. You could have gone ahead, because I didn't realise I was going to do it all red, you could have gone ahead and added a base wash to the whole of the bauble. So all of those remaining sections. That's what I probably would have done if I picked sooner that I wanted to do it all red. Now I'm going in with some more concentrated red and I'm working this throughout the more shadowed areas, mainly again at the top, also a few shadows within that centre section. You can see I'm just tapping that in there, and also all throughout the bottom as well. I like to add a variety of red tones rather than just one generic red tone all the way across the bauble, just to give it more dimension and to make it look more interesting. You can see that if I wasn't to use the masking fluid, it would have been really hard to work my paint around all of those little golden lines. The red probably would have gone on those areas and it would have been hard to keep a nice straight line with the brush. So it was easier to go in with that really small nibbed masking fluid pen to start off with and just to block them all out. I also worked that red tone throughout the little gaps in that golden cap on top of the ornament as well. And I'm going in with the purple and working the shadows throughout this other section. Again, focusing mainly on the top, a couple of shadows throughout the center section of the bauble. And adding quite a lot to the bottom section. So now I'm going to start to work on the remaining 3 sections. First by going in with that light wash of red. Now tapping in some darker reds at the top and bottom and just throughout the middle as well, and adding a base layer to those other side sections of the bauble. I'm going to darken up the bottom section and the top. Working some purple throughout the whole of the bottom of the bauble now. Working some more purple throughout the top of the bauble. And you can use tissue if you want to lift up any highlights to make the center of the bauble a bit more highlighted and add more contrast. Don't worry if you brighten up an area too much more than you wanted to, because you can always go back over the top with the red like I'm doing here if you realise that you don't want it to in fact be that light. Make sure you keep looking back at your reference image as well to check that you're on the right track, that you're happy with how you're going. I'm also building up a bit more green in between the masking fluid, because I don't want it to be that when I remove the masking fluid you can't really tell where it was applied because the whole area around it looks white. So I'm just adding a base layer in between those branches just to fill in the remaining white paper. And I'm also adding a little bit of grey, so some diluted black, to fill in the shadows throughout this clear gem decoration. There's quite a lot of highlights which we'll be adding with gouache and that we've masked off. But now I've waited for all of that to dry and I'm going to go ahead and remove all of the masking fluid. I started off by using my fingers, and then I realised that it was a lot easier to use a cloth like a tea towel to remove this. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead now and just remove all of the masking fluid, and then I'll be back to talk you through the next part. Now that I've removed all of the masking fluid, I'm going to go in with some watercolour pencils to fill in these details, like the detailed bits of gold in the ornament. But don't worry, you don't have to go in and use watercolour pencils if you don't have them. You could just carry on using watercolour paints. I just like the pencils because it's easier to get in these details. And I'm just basically going to add a layer of this very yellow gold toned watercolour pencil all the way through these sections within this ornament, apart from that highlight, those two triangular shaped highlights that we masked off. So the colour of this, I don't really know 100% what the colour is. I think it's something like a Naples yellow, but every coloured pencil set, not coloured pencil, watercolour set and watercolours, it might be named something differently. So really just aim for a colour that's gold. So a gold yellow tone or even a yellow tone. So don't worry too much about having the exact colours I do. I just picked up what I thought looked best. I didn't really worry about the names. So just pick up a colour that looks gold and just lightly and evenly apply it throughout all of these sections, apart from the bright highlights. I'm also working it throughout the ribbon as well. And we will be blending this out with some water later on. If you spot that there's any masking fluid still on there, make sure you just rub it away. Just going over the cap on the ornament. We will be darkening up the red on the bauble as well. It dried lighter than I thought it would in those like other sections. It looks good in the sections we did at the start, those two sections on the left hand side and then the two sections on the right hand side, but the middle section and those two sections on the furthest to the side, they are quite light. Anyway, I'm also going in with a darker brown. This is more of a golden toned brown, and I'm just using this for the shadows within the cap of the ornament and the ribbon. So I'm just going in and adding in the shadows to the golden areas. Just with this light brown, it's just more of a golden shade brown. And I'm also working it throughout the tops of these little golden strips on the main bauble. And I'm just looking throughout the gold trimming, and I'm just looking for any shadows that I can see. But I'm mainly adding some shadow throughout the top and bottom of the gold. And also along the right hand side as well, where it seems to be in more shadow. Just to give it a little more dimension to the gold. Now I'm going to go in with a nice dark red, and I'm going to start to use this on the top of the bauble just to darken up where those shadows are. As you can see, I'm going throughout each section right at the top and just shading this lightly on each of these areas, and when we blend it out with water, it's just going to make it a bit more of a darker red. I'm working it throughout those side segments because, like I said, they are a bit lighter, so I want to darken them up. I'm also working it throughout the bottom of the bauble because, like I said earlier, the top and the bottom of the bauble is going to be the darkest and it's going to be lighter in the middle. Also, the further segments, like the furthest to the side of the bauble, is also going to be shadowed. So it's going to be shadowed around the edges of the bauble and the top and bottom. And it's going to be the lightest right in the center. I'm also working some of that darker red throughout the red bauble in the background, around the sides and the top and bottom of the bauble, directly underneath that gold one. If you like the definition created by these pencils, then you could even use coloured pencils for this. But watercolour pencils or watercolours would be better. because we also are going to be using gouache, and if you go over the top of coloured pencils with gouache, then it's not archival to do it that way. The gouache won't stick well on top of the coloured pencil. So now I'm going in with just a normal red colour, a lighter red, and I'm just working this throughout any areas that I want to be more of an intense red. Because at the moment these areas are very washed out and light, so I want to make them more of a rich, vibrant red. So I'm just shading this around the sides of each segment. And trust me, these do look a lot more vibrant once you add water. I'm also adding it a little bit on top of that gold to help transition into the gold better, so it's not just stopping at a certain point. And I'm layering some of that red onto the bauble in the background. Now I'm going back in with that gold pencil that we used earlier, and I'm just going to use that to create this soft out of focus gold lights in the background as well. So I'm just working this throughout the background for any areas of gold that we can see. And finally, before we finish up and add the water, I want to go in with the black and just work this throughout any areas that we need to make darker, mainly in the background in between those branches, but also just to clean it up and define any edges, for example, the shadow around the ribbon, around that metal loop that the ribbon goes through, darkening up around the edge of the main bauble and the branches. And I'll darken up around that icicle and also around the gold bauble as well. So I'm just going to go in with this black pencil, and you'll see that I'm just darkening up any areas that need to go darker, that aren't dark enough already, just to create more of a contrast. So mainly I'm working it around the sides of all of the main ornaments and branches. Now that I've done that, it's just time to go in with my brush and just activate all of this paint. So just go in with a wet paintbrush. You don't need to have too much water on your brush. And I'm just going to work my brush throughout each section that I've added any watercolour pencil to. And you can see that it just nicely blends all of that pencil out. It gets rid of the grainy look of the watercolour pencils. I'm first going to work on the red sections of the bauble. You want to work one colour at a time, so I'm going to do all the red. And then I'm going to move on to the gold once I've cleaned my brush. Otherwise you don't want to smudge in the green onto the gold. And yeah, I'm basically going to go in with my brush and just blend out all of the areas that I've added the watercolour pencil to. So I'm just going to blend out all of the watercolour pencils. So that is the red pencil, the golden pencil, and just the black in the background. So that's what I'm going to be doing for the next couple of minutes. You can see that I'm blending it onto the highlight just to tone it down a little bit and make it look a bit more realistic and natural. Yeah, I'm just going to continue this step, blend out all of your watercolour pencil, and then I'll be back to talk you through the next part. So now that I've blended out everything with that water, so all of the watercolour pencils are blended out, you can see that it looks a lot more intense and darker and richer, more vibrant, and everything stands out a little bit more. But I do want to go in with a light green watercolour pencil and just add a couple of details to the branches, just add a few little details. So I'm going to go in with a light green watercolour pencil. And I'm just going to add a couple of strokes to each of the branches to create more highlighted bits to the branches, as you can see. Just a couple of wisps here and there. It looks really good over the top of that dark background. And you can see I did it in a couple of other areas towards the top as well. Now, time for my favourite step, which is going in with white gouache. I am using the Winsor & Newton Designers Permanent White Gouache. And I'm going to use the gouache to create more highlight to the snow and reflections and more of a sparkly look to the ornaments and decorations as well. So I'm going in first, and you can see that I'm working over the top of the red ornaments. I want to create more of a glittery look to that. Also just blocking in this highlight on the main red bauble. I mixed a little bit more water into my gouache so it wasn't so opaque. And I'm just getting in that highlight, making it look nice and bright so that the bauble looks really reflective. And I'm just looking at all of the bauble and just seeing where the lightest areas are to see which parts we need to brighten up. I'm also going in with some gouache over the top of the gold just to lighten that up more. Also, you can see that the gold has a little bit of a sparkly look to it, so we will be creating that sparkly look in a minute. I'm just going throughout all of these little stripes of gold, going over them with the gouache, just so it's a subtle gold colour. I just want to shape them better. And I'm also just creating a few highlights where I can see reflections within the bauble as well. I'm also adding the white gouache to the metal cap on the ornament, just focusing on where the highlights are within this section. Once again, going over each of the gold stripes. Just to lighten it up a little bit, not too much. You don't want to completely cover up the gold look. I just wanted to lighten it a little bit. Now I'm going to go in and add the highlights for the ribbon on the sides. Again, keep looking at your reference to identify where the highlights for each section are. Going in with some more opaque gouache to brighten that up even further. I'm going to do it on the left hand side of the ribbon as well. And for this metal loop, just tapping on some gouache to give it a glittery look. I feel like the final step with the gouache is what really starts to bring everything together, makes it look sparkly and more Christmassy, and it really does make it like pull everything together and finishes it off. It really does take it up to that next level. Just going to continue to add the highlights to the metal cap of the ornament. Now I'm going to work on adding sparkle to each of the gold stripes, and I'm just stippling on the gouache with my brush, just using lots of little dots to really make it sparkly. You still want some of that gold to peep through, so you don't want to add the gouache everywhere. You just want to lightly go in quite randomly and just stipple on the gouache in a couple of areas. I'll just stipple it randomly onto the gold stripe, and it will give it more of a twinkly look to it. And again, I'm just going to repeat this throughout all of the gold on the main bauble. Just tapping it on there, and I'm also brightening up that main highlight once more. Now you can see that another method that I'm using to give that glittery sparkly effect is if you make your paintbrush really dry and just have some opaque gouache on there, but it be quite dry, then you can use the texture of the watercolour paper to help you. So because it's cold pressed paper, it has a bit more texture to it. So if you lightly go over it with this dry paintbrush that has some gouache on it, it will catch onto only a couple of parts of the paper to give this really nice twinkly look. And this is faster to do, and it just very quickly makes everything look really nice and sparkly. So I'm just going to repeat this process throughout all of the golden pattern on the main ornament. I'm also finishing off this main bauble by just looking around and going in with my gouache and adding the final highlights and outlining the bauble a little bit where the highlights are. And once again finishing off that gold trimming, but make sure you're looking around to get and making sure you're getting in all of the highlights throughout the bauble as well. Now I want to go in and brighten up the snow on the branches. So once again, I am using a stippling motion, and I'm very much using the same motion that I did when we did the winter trees and we were painting in the snowy branches. So I'm just stippling it to give more of a natural look, because I don't want it just to be a smooth line. I want it to be bumpy. So I'm just tapping on that watercolour paint on the branch for any areas that I feel need more of snow to it, more snowy look to it, or even to brighten up the snow that's already on there if I don't feel like it's bright enough. So really make sure you're just doing this tapping motion with a very small round detailed brush. And just do this for any areas on the branch that you feel haven't got enough snow to them. And also take this time to look at your painting and decide whether you need to go lighter in any areas, whether you need to add more sparkle to certain parts of the ornament or add more highlights. So really analyze your painting, because it might be different to mine and you may need to tweak areas that are different to what I'm doing. So I'm adding a couple more highlights. And you can see that very quickly adding in these highlights quickly turns it into a very reflective looking object. I'm going over those areas with the tissue though, because I felt like they were too bright and so they didn't look very realistic. Well, when they're bright white, it can take away from the realism, so I just thought I'd lighten them up a bit. And I'm just repeating the same process by adding in all of the highlights for the ornaments in the background. Just looking at the reference, identifying the key highlights and just sketching them in with my gouache. Again, you can go in with the tissue and tone them down if you need to. I'm using a clean brush that's just got water on it to help tease out and blend out that highlight that I've done on the side of the bauble. And on the left hand side. And I'm just blending out this other shadow, this other highlight. Getting some more opaque gouache. And so I'm going to keep tweaking the highlights on this bauble until I'm happy with them. Now I'm also tapping on the white gouache in the same way that I did with the snow on the branches, but I'm doing this to create a glittery look to the red bauble. So it's also the same as how I started off by stippling the gouache onto the gold trimming to create a sparkly look, and I am using the tissue to go over it because it is very subtle. So I don't want it to look white, I just want it to look like a lighter red. Just adding a couple more highlights to that gold bauble. Loading my brush up with gouache again, and now I'm going to start to work on the highlights that you can see on the clear gem decoration. So I'm going in with quite a lot of thick gouache to make sure it's really bright, and I'm just painting in the highlights that you can see on the reference on the left hand side. And I'm also adding a few wisps with the white just to give it more of a snowy, Christmassy look to it by adding little frosty branches. I did this when we did the robin as well. Now I'm just going to finish off the main bauble. Just add a couple of final highlights to it. Brighten up any areas that I need to. Again, you may need to brighten up different areas to me, so you don't have to copy this exactly if you feel like you don't need to brighten up a certain area that I am. So adjust my tutorial to fit your needs. You can skip steps if you don't feel like you need to do them. I'm again using that dry brushing technique to add more of a glittery look to the gold. And I'm just going over the whole of the painting, looking to see if I need to brighten up any highlights even further, because gouache does dry a little bit darker than it looks when it's wet. So you may think it looks bright enough when it's wet, but then it might dry out a little more subtle looking. So you can go in with some more gouache and just go over and layer the gouache over areas that you've already done if you don't feel like they're bright enough. I'm adding a few more little wisps, a few more white little branches. And I'm going to finish off by topping the other branches with more snow and going over those, because I haven't done that yet. We've just done that first branch on the left hand side. We haven't done all of the others. So I'm going to start to use the same process of just tapping on the gouache to go over and add any snow that I need to onto these branches. I also want to go in a second and add some splatters, which I've done with every single painting. I think it adds such a nice effect. So I'm just tapping on the back of my paintbrush to get in those little twinkly white splatters. I always find that it's a really nice way to finish off a painting. Brightening up the loop on the ornament, the metal loop. And you can go back in with your watercolour pencils if you want to saturate the colours in a couple of areas even more. So if you want to add more of a golden tone to certain areas. I'm going in with the red watercolour pencil just to define the edge of these sections a bit more, and to create more of a glittery look by stippling it on to that centre of the bauble. But really I'm just tweaking each area now until I'm happy with it. I've basically got everything in, it's just about making the tiny little adjustments. But we're basically finished with this painting. I really hope you like how yours is turning out. And I'm just going to finish off this painting by adding a glittery look to the golden bauble in the background. I know it's not on the reference, but I wanted it to look more sparkly. So as you can see, I'm just going ahead and tapping on lots of little dots with my white gel pen to make this bauble look a little more sparkly. But then once I've done that, that is it for this painting. I'm just going to continue for the next couple of minutes to stipple on this white gel pen until I'm happy with how this bauble looks. The final thing to do is remove the tape and look at our final painting. Once again, if you followed along to this or any of the other tutorials that I've done in this series, or any tutorials in general on my Patreon, then make sure to post what you've done on the community page. I love to see the work that you guys create. But thank you for following along. I hope you enjoyed this series, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye everybody.